centrale. Hi guys. Hi guys. Hi guys. Okay. Sorry, technical issues. Thank you very much for being here. We're very excited to start the 2025 Italian Symposium. For those that don't know, the 2025 Italian Symposium has been going on since 2022. This is our third edition. And this year, with United Italian Societies expanding in more than 8 countries, /9 now, we are bringing the Italian Symposium in 3 different countries. This week will be in London, next week we will be in Madrid, and from the 11th to the 13th of April, we will be in New York. And so we are very excited to start the Italian Symposium here where it was born. The guests will arrive in a couple of minutes. Before that, I just wanted to dedicate 1 minute as an advertisement for what we do, especially because we wanted to announce the coming back of our own student-led think tank, the UIS Research Center. And we've rebranded it a little bit. It's essentially becoming a spin-off of United Italian Societies, which is, and we aim to be the hub for PhD students, Italian PhD students that want to network and connect and eventually research together. So we are very excited to launch this, and we are looking for people to join us. Essentially how it works is providing an opportunity to Italian students, undergrads and masters, to publish something together with a PhD student, and the PhD student working on his or her research and eventually publish it with her own university. So we'll, of course, publish more news and updates on the program itself, but we are very excited about this. It is one of the many projects that we are working on. And so if you are interested, please DM us at our account, uis.researchcenter, because it's a very good opportunity, and I think it could be very useful for students, especially at LSE. That said, thank you very much again for the attention. I'm gonna give it 1 or 2 minutes. The guest will arrive now in a couple of minutes, and enjoy, because it's very interesting as a panel. Their major expertise in what they do, and we are very honored to have them at the Italian Symposium. Thank you very much.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hi. Welcome to the first panel of the 2025 Italian Symposium. It's a pleasure to welcome you all here to the LSE. And as the President of Italian Society, it's our really pleasure to host again and be the partners even this year for the 2025 Italian Symposium. I'm going to pass it to the moderator for tonight, Professor Angelo Martelli, to introduce the guests tonight. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome on my behalf as well. I'm Angelo Martelli. I'm an assistant professor in the European and International Political Economy here at the LSE. And it is really my pleasure to co-moderate this event with Alberto Martino and to welcome our guests, EIB Vice President Gelsomina Vigliotti and Carlo Cottarelli, for this event. So before I properly introduce our guests, and proceed with our conversation, I would just like to ask those in the audience to please put your phones on silent as to not disrupt the event. The event is also being live streamed and will hopefully be made available subject to no technical difficulties. As usual, there will be ample chance for you to ask a lot of questions to our speakers. And when you do, please just state your name and affiliation. We will try to ensure that we will have ample time, as I was saying, so we will stop ourselves from monopolizing the conversation. There is no doubt that we live in turbulent times. Over the last weeks and probably even more the last days, there is certainly a feeling that the geopolitical and economic landscape is being transformed at an unprecedented speed. The Germans would say a sort of Zeitenwende on steroids, I would add, that does not leave much room to digest and analyze the latest announcements, but immediately requires a plan of action. Therefore, we are even more grateful to have here Gelsomina Vigliotti and Carlo Cottarelli for and to help us understand how to tackle the current challenges. Gelsomina Vigliotti is an Italian economist who serves as the vice president of the European Investment Bank. Before her appointment, she held various roles at the Italian Ministry of Economy and Finance, where she was responsible for international relations and represented Italy in key economic fora such as G7 and G20. Carlo Cottarelli is currently director of the Italian Public Finance Monitor of the Università Cattolica del Sacro Cuore di Milano. He was executive director at the IMF board and before also IMF Fiscal Affairs Department head. And also for the Italians among us, and I think there are many, he was commissioner for public spending reform from October 2013 to October 2014. So I will kick off with the first couple of questions and then pass on to Alberto. For Vice President Vigliotti, the European Investment Bank is often described as the financial arm of the European Union. And borrowing a bit from the title of our conversation, how do you think does the EIB really translate those broader political goals into concrete investments?
First of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm very glad to be with you tonight. So the EIB, the European Investment Bank, is the financial arm of the European Union. Many of you may recall that it was founded 1958, just at the beginning of the history of the European Union. And the objective of this institution was that to create a level playing field among the countries. And actually, to be honest, it was also mostly to support the southern of Italy, because in the very beginning, the European Union was just 6 countries, the founders' countries. Over time, this issue of creating a level playing field to support cohesion has been pretty much relevant, especially with the enlargement of the European Union, especially with the enlargement to the east. And over time, we actually embraced the idea of the principles of the Paris Agreement. So that by 1995, our main goal was to support the climate transition of the European Union. So and actually the 2 main goals of the bank until now are it's climate action and cohesion. So we have to dedicate at least 50% of our activities to climate action and at least 45% to cohesion. By next week, if our board will approve it, we will have a third transversal objective, that is to ensure security. So we are the financial arm of the European Union. We serve the public policy objectives of the European Union. We are at critical times. It doesn't mean that we will become, the defense bank of the European Union at all. Actually, the European Union already in the past financed security investment, in particular if there were, for instance, in Italy, where the military action and the civil protection are together, we had opportunities to finance already initiatives there. The idea now is that actually we had very strict criteria in individuating what was the dual use, because actually what we wanted to finance, it was something that was mainly dedicated to civil use, because we know that within some military expenditure there is a lot of innovation, a lot of new technology, and also a lot of civil uses. These criteria were very much strict. Now this criteria has become is becoming wider, also by indication of the European Council, by our governors who are the finance ministers. That means that the clear exclusions for us, it will be weapons and ammunition. We will never finance a weapon and ammunition, but there is a lot of to be financed in terms, for instance, of cybersecurity, in terms of satellites, in terms of space economy, of undersea technology. So, I mean, I wanted to dedicate this, on this topic because nowadays there is a lot to, that is being said and talked about this. And actually also to give you some numbers, we are talking is the overall volume of activities of the EIB annually. It's last year it was 95 billion euro. And the security expenditure, it was 1 billion and it will become 2 billion. So that to say, also to give you the numbers. But what is relevant, and then please stop me if I'm not talking too much, it's that the role of the bank in whatever field, our role is that to mobilize resources. We never finance 100% the project. We generally finance 50%, sometimes 75%, if it's particularly, it's worthy because of the objectives that the project pursues. But, our involvement is that to catalyze resources, to put a stamp of quality on the project so that, for instance, private investors can be attracted. And so the idea is to mobilize. So definitely the 2 billions that maybe next year we will tend to vote to security, maybe they will further help to mobilize more, but with respect to the whole budget of the EIB, we are still talking about not a very relevant part. And I'll be also very happy to talk about all the other objectives. Again, the two main objectives are the climate transition, cohesion, and not to forget competitiveness. I hope that we will come back to that. That's the real issue of Europe today, and there will not be any trade-off between climate, cohesion, security, and competitiveness.
We move to competitiveness in a second by bringing in Carlo Cottarelli. I asked this initial question because we live a bit in unprecedented times, and institutions that had a different mandate to start with are now shifting towards also defense and security to some extent, also after the latest announcement by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen that indicated also the EIB as one of the tools that will be used. And so I wanted to ask Mr. Cottarelli what he thinks of this changing scenario to some extent. How does this affect Italy in particular? So we are trying always to bring these two perspectives, the European one and the Italian one. So we were discussing before the latest simulations that you have been doing on Italy. What can you tell us? How does Italy fit in this bigger picture?
Okay. First of all, again, thank you very much for inviting me here again. I'm very particularly happy to be here with Gelsomina because you mentioned that I was executive director for the IMF. In that period, when I was the 3 years when I was executive director, she was my boss.
No.
She was my and she was very nice.
The reference point.
And so, what do I think? First of all, for what is happening is a disaster for the world. Maybe it's an inevitable disaster, which I believe is fundamentally related to the difficult to mismanage, the process of globalization, the change in power of the power of different countries. The real match in the future will be between the US and China. So I see this, what is happening now, as an attempt of the US to take Russia away from being too close to China, because the real match will be between these two superpowers. And this is the result of something that is unprecedented in economic history. No country has increased its GDP and its power as rapidly as China in the last 25, 30 years. For the first time since the Second World War, we don't have one country that is clearly dominating all the rest, the United States. We have two countries, as we say in Italian, due galli nel pollaio. And because China, in terms of GDP, is larger than in GDP and purchasing power parity is larger than the United States. It produces 54% of world steel. 54% of world steel is produced by China. The US is producing 5% or something like this of the world GDP. And so in this situation, Trump is trying to reaffirm the power of the US, and so far China is keeping quiet. But at the end, that will be a match between China and the US. In the middle, we have Europe, we have Ukraine, we have Europe, which is as usually divided. We have countries, different views regarding rearmament in Italy, and within the same party in Italy, for example, in the Democratic Party, there are differences. Certainly, there are differences between the two coalitions. And so we have to manage this situation from the point of view of Italy. It's not going to be easy because we have a burden of GDP, which is of public debt, which is, as you know, one of the highest in the world. The Commission is going to lift partially the ceiling on expenditure, but that doesn't really change, doesn't really help too much, simply because we will need to borrow from financial markets more than before. We have presented as a result of the return to the European fiscal rules in the new form. Last year, all European countries had to present a medium-term fiscal adjustment plan, 7 years in the case of Italy. And the new rules were such that not a big adjustment. What was required from Italy was not a big adjustment. The public debt to GDP ratio was supposed to decline by 3.3 percentage points in 7 years, moving from something like 135 to 132% in 7 years. With this increase, we just computed that we're coming out with an estimate tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. With these increases in military spending, which are recommended by Ursula von der Leyen, even assuming that Italy does not spend everything that will be allowed to, the debt to GDP ratio in 2031 will be higher than what it is now. Bottom line, we are in the hands of the European Central Bank. Fortunately, in 2022, the European Central Bank introduced this new tool, the so-called TPI, the transmission protection instrument. Strange name to mean that if the central bank increases interest rate, the central bank wants this to affect all countries in the same way. She doesn't want, the central bank doesn't, the ECB doesn't want to affect too much a country which has a high debt. So bottom line, according to this tool, if a country is in line with the European rules, the fiscal rules, the macroeconomic imbalances rules, the implementation of the next generation European plan, ECB can intervene in support of the country for infinite amounts, very large amounts. Let's hope that this happens. By the way, TPI, Transmission Protection Instrument, is the acronym of this. The joke that runs around financial markets that TPI really means to protect Italy. Transmission Protection Instrument, to protect it. We'll see, it has never been activated, but with a public debt ratio that does not decline, let's hope that there are no further shocks. And if there are shocks, we have to rely on the ECB.
Right, moving back to Vice President Vigliotti, you just mentioned how the European Investment Bank, by providing financial help and aid to innovation just gives a certificate on the quality of innovation itself. So do you think, on that the public sector in general should take a lead on financing innovation itself, or should it still be in the hands of the private sector itself? And the question that comes from that is what is the role of the IAB in all of this?
So this is, I think there's a lot of theory, so if innovation is a push-pull, and what is the role of the private and the public sector. To me, the public sector has an important role to play in the field of innovation. I mean, to give an impulse, and to provide the seed money that sometimes are not cannot be found in the market. We see, especially now in Europe, that there are a lot of startups, in particular in the new technologies, where private money is there, but maybe not at the very beginning, and in particular not at the stage of the scale up. So let me say, I think that many of you are economists year round, so you know that in the life cycle of a company, so you have to early beginning where maybe you can crowd in resources by some families, some supporters, and then the more you move your scale, you need much more resources. What we see now in Europe is, in particular with the more innovative firms, is that they can start, they can become a very successful startup, but when they need to scale up, when they need to increase and maybe to be quoted at the stock exchange, there aren't enough capital to support them. So what for instance, we do at the IAB is, first of all, to provide support in all the stages of the life cycle of the company, being careful not to crowd out private investors, because actually our role is that to crowd in private investors and not crowd out. But actually, when we see that there is this gap, as the Draghi report highlighted, we are trying to put, some initiative in place. For instance, 2-3 years ago, together under the initiative of Germany and France, and then other European countries, also Italy, participated, that there is an initiative which is called the European Tech Champion Initiative. And this initiative actually was, the aim of this initiative is to support the growth of a venture capital fund, of a private equity fund, to a scale of at least 1 billion that will allow them to put tickets of at least 100 million within firms who needs these resources to stay in Europe, not to be acquired by a US fund or a nation fund, or maybe not be forced or incentivized to be and to look for an IPO in the US. There are other reasons of where we can look into why, for instance, a new company may decide to go in the US instead of staying here in Europe. But actually, what we are trying to do is to support the firms who require more resources. So this is the role of the public sector that we see, is that to support those segments of the economy, particularly in the most innovative sectors, to allow them to grow. At the initial phases, together with the Commission, there are also other mechanisms, like, for instance, the European Innovation Fund, who support the startups and those companies who can start growing. And at the same time, also, we support those companies before the scale up through the venture debt. Many of you may know this type of instrument, which is a quasi-equity instrument that allow, it's a form of debt, which will not be amortized in the short term, so that it will be paid back only when the company will be able to make profit and to pay back this debt. I mean, in principle, it could be also converted in stocks. I mean, we are still thinking, actually, what is one of the development that we are thinking at EIB, also to be more active on the equity side, since actually on top of that, what is necessary in the EU companies, it's also in terms of equity. This is to say that, in short, that I see a role for the public sector for fostering innovation, but it should be just, the trigger to attract private investors, because I mean, overall, I don't think that, only through public resources it will be possible to make a difference, even if, to be honest, especially in critical times like now, and like the Draghi reports also again recall that, the amount of resources needed to improve the European competitiveness are huge. And in these cases, I think that also the involvement of the public sector with a big investment will be relevant. So, but now we have to square the circle with, as Carlo said before, between growing deficit, growing debt, need of investment for fostering competitiveness to support the defense. And that's why I think that what is important is to use the public resources in an efficient way. For instance, to use much more the instrument of the guarantees, the Juncker plan, InvestEU plans. These were all plans which actually were grounded very much on the guarantee instrument, so that to ensure an investor, to ensure public, to ensure banks and financial intermediaries to provide resources to the investors with a guarantee that if there will be something going wrong, there will be some public backstop.
Right, you mentioned the Draghi report and how recently it just came out how there's gaps in how Italy's innovation ecosystem has some difficulties and problems, especially in scaling up businesses. Now, asking Professor Cottarelli, do you agree with Draghi's assessment, or what would be for you the structural changes that are needed for Italy to foster innovation in general?
But the main issue for Italy is to have a faster growth of productivity. I mean, innovation is one tool to achieve this, but you mentioned Draghi's report, or let's go back to the plan that was prepared when Draghi was Prime Minister, as part of the Next Generation European Union plan. That plan started by one statement: Italy's problem is the low growth, the growth rate of productivity. A few words about where we stand in terms of growth. So I'll give you in 3 minutes the history of the last 30 years, 25 years. The period between the 20 years between 1999 and 2019 were the worst 20 years of Italian economic history since 1861 in terms of per capita growth and per capita and growth of productivity. Essentially 0.1, something like that, on average. Then we had the COVID that hit everybody, and then something surprising happened. The recovery from COVID was much faster in Italy than in the average of the European Union. It was the first time, 2020, from the middle of 2020 to the middle of 2022, we grew faster than the average, and it was one of the fastest growth rates in Italy. Why this happened, I don't know, Draghi was there for most of the time, but I think that what really made the difference was that we got a huge amount of money from the European institutions. Don't know the numbers for the EBRD, but sorry, for the European Investment Bank. But the ECB, we received something like 300 billion, more than 300 billion from the ECB in 2021, 2020 to 21. we got the money from the next generation European Union. We were flooded by money, and that really helped the economy. Once that money started slowing down, we also slowed down. This government, Meloni became prime minister at the end of 2022. For the first 6 quarters, from the end of 2022 to the middle of 2024, however, we were still growing slightly more than the average of the euro area. Not much. The cumulative growth in 6 quarters was 0.8. The euro area average was 0.6, which is not a bad result compared to that terrible period of 20 years that I mentioned. However, in the last 6 months, zero growth. We had 2 quarters of zero growth. The euro area grew by 0.5%. So I'm afraid that we are back to where we were in terms of growth. And innovation is part of the story, but the main problem, why innovation is done through investment. And so the question is, why is it so difficult to invest in Italy? Why is it so difficult? Doing business is difficult in Italy. Remember, there is this, unfortunately, it was discontinued, this World Bank report called Doing Business, and in most of the indexes were lagging behind everybody else, all our advanced economies. So doing business is difficult. And if you ask entrepreneurs what are the problems, the 3 main problems for a long time, always the same: taxation, the level and how complicated it is to pay taxes. Second and third, more or less in the same position, bureaucracy and how slow the justice system is. Now, the Piano Nazionale di Ripresa di Resilienza, PNRR, was expected to address these issues. Not tax reform, that was outside, that was a parallel reform, but certainly the reform of bureaucracy and the justice system. Some improvements, there has been some improvements in the speed of justice, but not much, and certainly less than what was expected to meet the targets of the next generation European Union. Bureaucracy, fortunately, I don't think there has been any improvement. The tax system, we still have one of the highest level of taxation in the European Union. Tax pressure is particularly high. Last year was particularly high, surprisingly, given the fact that we have a center-right government who went to power by promising a cut in taxation. And so those impediments to investment and to innovation, I'm afraid, are still there. The PNRR is not yet over, but we don't really see much of an impact on all this. This in the context, and I conclude, this in the context of a euro area, which has been until last year, we see this year, the lowest growth area in the world. In 2024, out of 196 members of the IMF, 196, which is basically the whole world, everybody grew last year except 9 countries. Of these 9 countries, 5 are in the euro area. There's something wrong in Europe, and things are do not look particularly promising with the tariff war, with possible wars and conflicts. So not a very good period for Europe.
It's interesting that over the last few days, we are now talking about a Europe turnaround, at least from the investors' point of view. I think the investors sometimes go from one super pessimistic front to the opposite.
I'm always on the pessimistic side, constant.
To the over optimism, because the announcement of von der Leyen, even more by the announcement by the candidate chancellor and now chancellor Merz, it seems that Europe is not seen in such a tight spot anymore, and we are trying to turn.
Okay, one thing. Definitely the fact that Germany is expanding fiscal policy is a good thing. Because I think the part of the story in Germany The Germans have been talking about structural issues which are there, the cost of energy that went down. But it's also part of the fact that the export-driven growth has not been as strong as it used to be in the past because of China. And so having a big push on domestic demand is a good thing. And this could help Italy.
Let's see if it passes through the constitutional change before the new parliament kicks in. So trying to link this issue of investment priorities to the geopolitical climate, in a way, since the Munich Security Conference in particular, and then after Zelensky was at the White House, we learned that the support of our allies in Europe is not so certain anymore. So looking at Ukraine and the evolving geopolitical situation, how does the EIB operate in such an uncertain environment, which, you know, it was dubbed as the climate bank, and now it has instead to operate on trying to finance, you know, new fronts that are opening up?
Yes, actually, at the very beginning, I already touched upon this point. That is, you know, to give much more relevance to the issue of security. I mean, to have it as a you know, highlighted also as a transversal objective. That is the, you know, objective of the European Union now that at this time, you know, it's the geopolitical context. It's very much different, and the European Union has to think about itself also in terms of security in a more, you know, it's a bold way. That said, as I said at the very beginning, within the portfolio of the EIB, you know, for sure, you know, security measures, security initiatives will increase. But, you know, it's very difficult that they will become, you know, the real bulk of our activities. Also because, I mean, as I said before, you know, we don't believe that, you know, the you know, the growth drivers which can come from the climate action and the digital transformation, which were at the base of the Green Deal, are over. Definitely, there is a different attitude towards these two themes, but you know, I always say that whatever you can think about the climate change, whatever you can think about the causes, what you have to do. I mean, we will have to cope with the natural disasters. We will have to cope with the cost of energy. So whatever you think about that, you know, you need about to take care of the cost of energy, and you need to heat your houses, and you need to refrigerate your houses. You need to adapt to natural disasters, and that means that we need investment for energy efficiency to become much more in Europe, you know, autonomous from a point of view also of energy, to adapt also our infrastructure, because I mean, what we pay also in terms of you know, coping with the consequences of natural disaster, which are becoming more frequent, whatever you can think about climate, you know, so, you know, it's the adaptation cost, I mean, the recovery cost, it's relevant. That's why we continue to push a lot of emphasis on the energy efficiency, on the production of renewable energy, on new technology, which can ensure the continuity of the provision of energy through renewable energy, and also to ensure that we have enough investment in terms of not only of mitigation, but also in terms of adaptation. And I want to give you some examples. So maybe I deviate from the issue of security, but that's important. We realize that it's important, but you know, at the same time, we will take care about other issues. And there's a particular project that we saw very, it's a teeny project, but relevant. And you know, I think most of you have Ischia. It's a beautiful island close to Naples, which is very often subject to events like earthquakes or flooding, etc. So we were asked to intervene there before intervening there, actually we said, okay, but what we have to do? We have just to repair what has been destroyed, or maybe we have to look at what are the investment, also understanding what is the type of lens that is there. So, for instance, the idea we offer is cost-free services in terms of advisory to prepare the projects. And this is things that we do for free for the public administration. And also, this is a way also to use public resources in an efficient way, to look at project and to see what are the needs, the real needs, the best way in which we can operate in that context, and in the way in which we can do much more impact. This is our role, and this is what we want to do also with the public administration, with the private investors. And the more now that public resources are maybe, there will be a wider use of public resources, but we know that maybe the usage will be much more diverted towards maybe military expenses. That's why we have to preserve also all those type of investment that so far have been relevant for Europe, because I think that the very much difference of the European Union, of Europe as a whole, with respect to other parts of the world, is also its welfare system. And I don't think that we have to lose that, and also to lose our standards. It's with Carlo, we worked a lot with many countries around the world. And he talked at the very beginning about China and the role of China also in many developing countries. And the way in which they invested there, which was not very often the more efficient way, actually more of the debt of these countries also because of ill-defined investment. And that's why, for instance, the role of the European Union is to go outside of the European Union, to invest outside in the less developed countries according to standards. We export standards. So we are not only the financial arm, the European Investment Bank, we are not only the financial arm within the European Union, but also outside of the European Union. Since also the security of the European Union is also addressing the challenges which are at our borders. It's in the neighborhood areas of the European Union. We know that at this moment, on top of Ukraine, we have other, important challenges. So we have to look at the security issue, not only just to rearm, but also to ensure that we have a good access to energy, that we have a good relationship with our neighbors, that we are able to implement with them and other partner investment in good countries have an impact. And just to close, this is interesting because we invest a lot also outside of the European Union. 10% of our activities, that is almost 10 billion per year, it's outside of the European Union. And so we are very strict also in terms of the procurement when we lend the resources. So we are very strict. And what we see is that when you are ready to provide finance according to certain standards, also other investors, like for instance China, now they are ready to provide similar standards. So also, this role is important. That's why, on top of the challenges, and let me conclude, Carlo is very pessimistic. I'm not optimistic, but at the same time, after 30 years of experience also with the European Union, it's through the crisis that the Union was able to, grow, to evolve, and I hope that also this can be an opportunity. Also because I wonder, and actually I'm also curious to know what Carlo thought about that. It's what's happening, for instance, in the US, if there will be maybe people who will try to move back to Europe, firms or investment who can decide to go back to Europe.
Before I hand over to Alberto for the last question, as promised, we are going to open up just after this question. So start preparing your interesting points and noting them down so that we can have an efficient exchange.
Bringing it back onto a conversation on green transition and itself on a national level for Italy itself. Professor Cottarelli, do you think the digital and green transition is still a priority, or is that a long-term objective for Italy itself? Is that still plausible in the short
The
term?
digital transition
Digital and green.
and green.
Yeah.
After the experience of the super bonus.
There is a lot of pushback on the green transition from the business sector. A lot. This goes to the current automotive directive of the European Union, the housing directive. And you really feel that in a country like Italy, but everywhere in the world, I'm afraid that people are not willing to pay the short-term cost of, I wouldn't say saving the planet in the long run. The planet is not going to disappear. We are not going to disappear, but it's warming up. It will warm up. And you really see that this in the business sector, that there's not much willingness to do this. To some extent, the push from the European Union went a bit too far. You went too far in this area. It went too far, especially even more in the area of, the reporting directive. I always keep forgetting the name, the SDD, that stuff. The reporting directive, which is now being again revised through the so-called omnibus package. It really created a lot of complication in doing business to the European firms. That is being, so there is a lot, the European Union went too far, it went too far about with the Green Deal. I'm afraid now, however, that we are going on the other side completely. And so I'm again pretty pessimistic about the future of the planet in terms of warming up and of decarbonization. Of course, Europe is just a small story of this in the whole world. The reality is that emissions have been growing always. We don't have yet the data for 2024, at least I've not seen data for 2024. Until 2023, global emission had always increased. And the goal was supposed to be down to zero emission by 2050. I don't think it will be possible. In terms of warming up, the goal was to contain the increase in the world temperature with respect to the so-called pre-industrial age by 1.5 degrees at the end of this century. 2023, 2024, we already reached that level. Now, of course, this was partly bad luck. There is a lot of volatility in world temperature, in global temperature, but the fact that we got to that target more than 76 years, 77 years in advance is not good. It's not a good sign. Digital transition, yes, that probably is going ahead. The only thing I want to mention here is that we're not investing enough in artificial intelligence. The US is spending something like 360 billion a year in artificial intelligence. China is second, a far away second with less than 140, less than 130, I don't remember exactly. Third place, you have the UK, and all individually taken, all other European countries are well behind. We're spending a lot now in defense. Defense is important, but only a part of defense may, through this dual initiative, especially lead to an increase in productive capacity, but most of it is not going to. You build a tank, the tank defense is not maybe necessary. Personally, I think that we're spending. The plan is of spending 800 billion. The number is too big. And so, yes, we do need to spend a bit more for defense, but I think that there is probably going to be too much waste. It's maybe because I was a commissioner for public spending and I had my hat on I don't know whether you have followed this debate about whether Russia is spending more than the rest of Europe. This was based on a report by this London-based International Institute for Strategic Studies, which this report includes two big errors. We did some debunking. Fortunately, in 2024, Europe if we define Europe as all the euro area countries plus UK, Turkey, and Norway, which are the NATO parts of Europe, which is not part of the European Union, we spent 56% more than Russia, corrected for at exchange rate, parity exchange rates, not less than, as this institute was saying. The international press, and I conclude on this, but this is pretty big. The international press, Financial Times, Politico, Associated Press, bumped throughout the world. This piece of news was bumped all around the world, and it was wrong. And I wrote to the Financial Times who were unwilling to make any correction. I'm a bit unhappy about it. And even within Italy, there were some newspapers that did not want to correct it.
So maybe then we go back to the question that you actually asked, Professor Cottarelli, but we open up first, if you agree, because I think it's super interesting to hear whether we think that a threat from Trump can actually become a big opportunity. So maybe we collect a few questions and then we come back to this. I have a rotating mic, which I can pass on.
Hello, good evening, everybody. I have a question.
You can just say your name.
I'm Matteo. Pleasure.
You are a student here.
I am not a student here. I'm a student at the University of Oxford. I was here actually I'm in London as a guest of our IC directors on a mission of Confindustria, but now I'm just as a student. Thank you. My question is specifically for Director Vigliotti. The matter of investment, defense and security investment at a supranational level is something unprecedented. Security specifically has always been a matter of national governments, to the point that, just to name a country that nobody's ever heard before, Greenland, is managing everything domestically except defense. So my question is, how are you going to manage the matter of governance? With which criterion are you going to decide which is something that you have to spend on, which is something that we're going to spend on and not at a supranational level? Also thinking about the dichotomy that always is there in defense and security spending of accountability, something that the EU was very, very dear, and secrecy to an extent, which is a part of security, which is a part of this investment. What criterion, what points, what are the metrics that you're going to take into account? Because I believe is in the security part of your investment that are going to embed in your mission. Governance is going to be a point of important and great contention between countries.
Thank you. Yes, please, there in the third row.
At the beginning, we mentioned that the true conflict is going to be between China and the US. I wanted to ask for you where Europe stands in this competition.
And your name is?
Alessia, I'm a student here.
Okay. Where does Europe stand in between China and the US?
This is more, I'm Lorenzo from LSE, and so we've been speaking about lots of very current problems here. Then we have other problems which have been in the European Union for a long time, but I think are still very current, such as regional differences within states. And, you know, for Italy, it has been something going on from unification of the country. And we're seeing that in the past 5 years, there has been, if we're being positive, no change. If we're being more realistic, probably a negative change. So the gap has been growing and growing. And I think that for the German elections, we have seen something very similar. So a very clear difference between Eastern and Western Europe, Germany. So I'm wondering, how can we solve this problem? We have been trying with cohesion funds for a long, long time. Is there a way to solve these problems? Is it a matter of the European Union, of investments, something more national level? So just your thoughts about this. And thank you very much.
So maybe we start with this because it's quite a lot already. So the first one is on governance, which criteria do you adopt for the investment going forward, especially on defense and security. Second one, where does Europe stand in this geopolitical competition between China, Europe, and the US? And if I may add, the question that was asked earlier, if we can turn this threat from Trump actually into an opportunity, and the issue of regional disparities. So I don't know which one you would like to take, but maybe we start with the government one.
Yes, it's a very good question. Is definitely still is a national competence of defense, and one of the major issues in Europe is not to deny the national competence, but maybe to agree on for instance, on some standards on tanks. Because I mean, if you can procure 100 tanks with the same standards, it will be much more cost efficiency instead of having 10 tanks with different stuff. So this is an issue that can be solved also, without having a European army. For the European Investment Bank, we do not see this problem in terms of the national disparities, because I mean it's the promoter of our projects are our governments or our private companies. And there are actually, what we want more is to finance cross-border investment, but that means there will be joint ventures among companies, or there will be agreements between countries to develop in particular on the satellite system, and where actually there is a lot of technology on the space economy. And at the European level, there are many European programs in this term. So I think that there are examples that we can follow. There is the issue of secrecy, but for institutions like the EIB, there is also an issue of transparency, because actually we have a very clear, transparent policy. So we will have to deal with these. So we will discuss with our, executive board on how to address this issue, because actually some of these projects will have some security issues also in terms of military secrecy, also or in industrial secrecy, which cannot be divulgated worldwide. So we will have to cope with that. But again, it's our involvement will be according to to our policies, and we will do more. But again, the scope won't be very much large.
Do you believe there are some there are red lines that you will not cross in the matter of accountability and transparency? Like we're not going to invest without reporting strictly whatever we're spending on.
I mean, if there is a military secrecy, I don't think we will have to look for some derogation.
Sure, thank you.
But I mean, it will be decided by the board, and the board is the shareholders of the bank are the 27 countries of the European Union. It will be up to them to decide.
Thank you so much.
Okay, I'll answer briefly the question about the south and the north of Italy. The good news is that 2023, the south grew faster than the north of Italy for the first time in a long time. Maybe because there was a lot of, not a lot, but relatively more spending in the south from the Piano Nazionale di PNRR. How can the south situation be improved? I fundamentally believe that the problems that I mentioned earlier, taxation, tax evasion, the bureaucracy, the slow pace of justice, which affect Italy, are just more serious in the south than in the other. So if you try to cure those problems, the improvement will be far larger in the south than in the rest of Italy. So those policies should also close the gap between the south and the north, simply because the problems are heavier in the south than in the north. On China, the US and Europe, the main problem there is that we are divided. I've always been saying that in a globalized world, the main reason why we need to be united in Europe is that we don't count at all if we are divided. And it's the same thing that has been said at times over and over again by Draghi. We need to move together. At the moment, we have a common currency. We don't have a common army, and we pay the consequences now in terms of spending. It would be much more efficient and cost effective if we had created a European army, as was the plan already in 1952. You know the story. That was how it all started, to have a single army in Europe. We don't have anything which is remotely seems to we don't have anything close to a government in Europe. You may have seen Trump signing an executive order after another one. There is nobody in Europe who can do the same. There is no government who can issue a decreto legge, a decree law, who can take a fast decision. Everything has to go through, for the major pieces of legislation, through the European Parliament and the European the Council of the European Union, the Council. We have two co-legislators. Some decisions have to be taken, for example, in the area of sanctions. In the area of sanctions, decision could be taken just by the Council, but again, you need to have a unanimity for a lot of many of these decisions. It's very difficult to be effective in the world if we are so fragmented. So this brings us to the question of in difficult times, will we finally be able to do things that we were not able to do before? Maybe. I'm afraid of one thing. I hope so. But my concern is this: the decision makers now, people who are in their 40s and in their 50s, were born long after the end of the Second World War. And I think that the Second World War was the main determinant of all the institutional change in Europe that took place. We have created the European Union, before that the European Community, out of the spirit of unity that came out of the disaster of the Second World War. And so the people who signed the Maastricht Treaty were born before the Second World War. They grew up, people like Berlusconi grew up during the Second World War. Even the further steps that we had at the end of the last decade, 2011, 2010, the creation of Meccanismo Europeo di Stabilità, European Stability Mechanism. Those actions were still taken by people who were born right after the war or before the war. And so now the people who are there to take decisions, they lost the spirit of that came out of the Second World War, the Ventotene spirit. The Ventotene spirit is getting lost. So it's becoming more difficult. So let's hope that they take a long-term perspective. They realize, even Draghi was born, he's 74, 75, so was born just after the war. So we hope that the people will see through these problems, but at the moment we don't feel to be as European as it used to be. The unanimity principle is a disaster. The United States got rid of the unanimity principle 13 years after. In 1776, they signed the Declaration of Independence. For 13 years, they have to survive with the unanimity principle. The current constitution was finally became effective in 1789. They got rid of the principle. We still have it. It's a major problem. So let's hope that we'll be able in the future to move more united, because in a globalized world, China, the US, we don't count. And in 20 or 30 years, less, in 20 years, 15, 20 years, China, India will also be much bigger than what it is now, and the European Union.
Yeah, just to add to this, for what it's worth, I think there is also an issue of political leaders that are actually missing the line. Sticking to the current setup in a way. I mean, we haven't heard from the European, from the president of the European Council, and now not even one word on the current situation. And I mean, many other missing bits are because of lack of political leadership to some extent, besides the institutional architecture that is in a way lacking. I mean, for instance, right now we had this huge announcement by Ursula von der Leyen on defense and security. Look what's happening in US universities. We could attract talent and spend 1 trillion on attracting talent, and it would be the biggest investment opportunity for Europe. So I think there are the conditions, but actually if there is no roadmap and no vision going ahead, it's a bit difficult. I mean, there could be the conditions even in the current setup. That's what I wanted to complement. Alberto, maybe you want to collect
Do you have other questions? Maybe on this side, the axle of the see. Yeah. One here, maybe, is that right? Here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us. My name is David Daversa. I'm studying a master's at King's College London. So for Vice President Vigliotti, with regard to the Draghi report, there's a renewed call for the EU to finally move towards a capital markets union. You think that's going to strengthen the EIB's mission? There's ongoing talks of deregulation and cross-border securitization. Do you think there's also a risk of financialization and financial vulnerability? Yeah, so regarding the capital markets union. Thanks.
Side, yeah. Any questions? Yeah.
Hi, I'm Gabriele Sadi here in LSE. Thanks for coming tonight. I had a question on Doge. I wanted to get your opinion on it, because we spoke a lot about bureaucracy tonight and how that affects Italy. And I was wondering, do you think a mechanism like that could work in Italy and solve the issue we have around bureaucracy and the slow times of the justice?
Buongiorno, hello, I'm Clemente and I'm studying at UCL. I had a question about investment. I know we talk about defense spending. Does that not increase a lot of tensions? And we were talking about maybe should there be some more investment into public sectors, because to combat poverty, for example, which I know in many so-called developing countries like Brazil, the president there, Lula, has done a lot of work through investment into public spending. So I was wondering, should there not be a big focus on public spending as well as defense spending, but not as much as there is at the moment across the world? That could be Russia, US, Europe, all of those countries. And my question is, how much more is there more investment that we can put into public sectors?
Maybe can you pass just the microphone just in the very back and the lungs? You had a hand up for a while.
So my name is Luis Fernando. I work at UCI alumni, and I work for Connect Place Catapult, which is one of the 8 catapults set by the UK government for innovation. My question goes a little bit what Alberto mentioned before about how the government can spend on innovation. And then I know that the European Investment Bank has some equity mechanism to be mentioned that you're trying to explore. And I think that goes a little bit what Mariana Mazzucato mentioned about the role of the government being an investor, looking as an investor, not just a grantor given, and how innovation comes through that. Because she mentioned a good example about iPhone is just an iPhone, because 12 of their biggest technology that allows an iPhone to be an iPhone was funded mainly by the US government. But the US government doesn't collect that money back to invest again. As you mentioned, public spending is limited. So my question goes, how Europe in general and for both can deal with that and really try to implement that and then generate more money to more investments. And then goes also an open innovation direction that will allow, for example, Professor was mentioned how Italy is very behind bureaucracy, but one good initiative that was set about 10 or 15 years ago, and then was one of the former vice president for Amazon was leading in Italy's IO solution, which tried to make the government a little bit more digital. So that would be my question.
Thank you.
Quick one. Yeah.
We're gonna have another round.
Another round.
Don't worry. We have time for
Hold
another.
it there. Hold it there.
Hold it.
We'll come back to it.
I take the capital market union. Thank you very much, because actually I think that a missing piece of the conversation tonight it was the wealth in the European Union. Because I mean, actually, overall in the European Union, it's a wealthy group of countries, but it's a very investment are very much based still on on banks lending, and there is it's a few channeling of the private saving towards investment. There have been many attempts through regulations and common initiative to create this capital market union that now has this wider name of savings and investment after the Letta report. And the idea is actually how to mobilize the private resources, which are, underutilized, and to move them towards the real economy. The situation within the European countries, it's not the same all over. We know that in the Nordic countries, for instance, in Sweden, there is the pension funds. They are big investor in also in funds, and they put a lot of resources in financing the real economy. This is not the same, for instance, in Italy or maybe in Eastern Europe. That's why, for instance, through the European Investment Fund, which is a branch of the European Investment Bank, is a fund of funds. We try to create an ecosystem for venture capital. We provide, resources to the funds of private venture capital or private equity to grow and to nurture, the growth of a new initiative. There is still to be done at the DIB. What we want to do is, first of all, for instance, through we are a big issuer of green bonds. We try to widen the use of this instrument, in particular in setting the standard, because we know that the standards for this type of instrument are very different. Also, you mentioned securitization. We have, I think, the European Investment Fund, one of the few, institution continuing using securitization and promoting this type of instrument, which enable also the banks to free up their capital. And actually, we are exploring also the way in which we can promote much more, equity, direct equity investment. As I said at the beginning, what is necessary also to ensure that the ability of the companies to scale up. So a lot to be done. We will be part of the system. On innovation, if I can say, definitely, the role of public sector is important. I said at the beginning, we have to be surgical. To look at the sector and to see where actually there is a need of a big injection of capital, and where there is just a need of a booster. and not proud artists. So I think that it's very important to look within the sector and to see the way in which the use of the public resources can be more efficient and cost effective, guarantees equity, lending. So also, the design of the financial instruments to support innovation is important. That's why institutions like us want also to build very much also on creating financial instruments which can enrich the capital market union.
Let me just say a few words about the issue of bureaucracy again. When we talk about bureaucracy, we really mean two things. There are two issues. One relates to what, using another word, we call red tape, the excessive number of procedures, the excessive number of entities involved in giving authorization to do some investment activity and things like that. And just to give a figure, it has been estimated, and this is an official figure, it's a number that was publicized by Minister Zangrillo, who is the Minister for the Public Sector in Italy. Last year, or in 2023, better, just small and medium enterprises spent 56 billion in essentially complying with the regulation. 56 billion is a huge amount, 2.5 percentage points of GDP, almost 3 percentage points of GDP. So that's one thing, and that requires, that's what people usually think in terms of bureaucracy. That requires simplification, simplification, and simplification. The second part, however, it's equally important, is to have a public sector machinery that works regardless of the regulation. So you need to run the public sector as you would run a private firm in a way. And running a private firm, any entrepreneur knows that the most important thing in running a firm is personnel management, which means hiring the right people, providing the right training, setting targets in terms of results that need to be obtained, even before that, measuring the results, and then rewarding those who are doing a good job and not everybody. Almost all these things are missing, are not satisfactorily implemented in the Italian public sector. And if you don't do this, even if you simplify things, if you don't provide incentive for people to work well, you're not going to improve very much your results. So fixing this would require a major reform effort and a huge investment of political capital. And so far, no political party and no government is willing to do this. Why? Probably because you don't win election by selling this stuff. You win election by promising that you will cut taxes, by promising that you introduce a reddito di cittadinanza, and by promising that you are sending people earlier in retirement. And however, if you don't fix this problem, I think you simply don't have you don't have the resources to realize all the promise that you made, because Italy will not be growing enough. And so it means a key challenge to find a political party. Keep in mind one thing, all political parties have the reform of bureaucracy on page 87, 187 of their electoral program. I would like to see a political party that puts this as number one. And perhaps in this way, you really been able to solve the productivity gap in Italy. We have some examples of this in Europe. Portugal, for example, they did a major reform of bureaucracy 10 years ago. By the way, as part of the IMF supported program. Spain is also becoming much better. And these countries are the countries that are now growing faster in Europe. Spain, Portugal, and Greece. The only country in Southern Europe, to understand Cyprus too, the only country in Southern Europe that is not growing fast is Italy. And that remains a big challenge for the whole European Union, I believe. So more needs to be done in the area of bureaucracy. Let's hope to find somebody. The bottom line is that people are not going to elect people. People are not going to elect governments who are willing to reform bureaucracy because they have priority. We fell into a sort of a vicious circle. Because of lower growth, people want to see results immediately and don't look at long-term reform that are really needed in Italy.
But Helmut Kohl lost an election because of he thought that he wanted to stick to to his vision and was courageous enough then to lose it to stand by his principles. On the issues of public investments, in part it was covered. Italy, I think. I don't know if you want to add anything. Doesn't have a great track record in poverty relief measures. To some extent, I mean that something was mentioned. But yes, I mean I think once also the red tape is cut and there are some efficiency gains from it, there can be a shift also to some means-tested poverty relief measures more than the current ones. As we promised, there will be a last two probably questions.
2 questions, very short and 2 points.
Yes.
So I'm Eduardo from the LSE, third year in accounting and finance. And I had a question for Professor Cottarelli regarding defense spending in Italy. So I was wondering, given your unprecedented scale of the European rearmament plan and the 800 million euros that were announced from von der Leyen recently, you mentioned that Italy is one of the countries in the Eurozone with the highest public debt to GDP, 135%, compared to countries like Germany as 65%. So I was wondering, how do you see Italy balancing its high public debt with the need to increase military spending? So you mentioned also TPI. Do you think that that will come into effect? And what is your horizon between today and then the next 2 years?
Another question. Yes.
Thank you. I'm Letizia, I'm a student here at the LSE. First of all, thank you for your time. We're learning a lot tonight. Regarding the current Italian government, sometimes the leaders of the 3 political parties have different opinions, and they are supporting different foreign political leaders. Do you think that this situation can ruin Italy's reputation in international trade and in the financial markets or not? Thank you.
So basically within the same coalition, there would be leaders supporting different factions, more towards Trump or towards the government.
Within the government.
Yeah. Let's take one last question.
Hi, I'm Salvatore, I'm a PhD student in environmental economics here in the Department of Geography, and I do research in green innovation. I would like to ask you, why don't we see more financing for breakthrough innovation in Europe? So technologies that have a high risk of failing, but maybe also of succeeding with great results. Something that instead we see in the US, and we have been seeing for a very long time, starting from, I know, Apollo mission and but also more recent projects. Why do we keep financing projects that they're not something radically new? Like, I know, I think about the Horizon 2020 program. It's not something that really contributes in a breakthrough way to innovation. So financing innovation that have the capacity to make us leaders, not just in regulation in Europe.
Maybe the last one, because you have a counter narrative to this, I guess.
No, the issue of public debt in Italy, how we can cope with this increase in public spending for defense. At the moment, the European Union is kindly lifting the expenditure ceilings, which would allow us to borrow more, but this increases debt. Keep in mind one thing, this government is relatively cautious. Giorgetti is certainly worried about public debt. Meloni, I think, is also worried about public debt. And by the way, something unprecedented happened in 2024. Revenues increased faster than expected, and the government decided to save all the additional money that was coming in. Last year, we ended up with a deficit that is about 20 billion below the target. So the deficit was smaller, not 20, but maybe 18 billion below the target. So the government is worried. However, this said, given the pressure for military spending in Europe, military spending will have to be increased. Italy spends 1.6% of GDP in military spending, in defense spending, which is below even the 2 percentage point of GDP NATO target. Ursula von der Leyen now talks about increasing spending by 1.5 percentage point, which would move Italy to 3%. We computed that even if Italy does this gradually in the next 4 years, the debt to GDP ratio, as I mentioned earlier, in 2031 will be larger than what we have now. That's why I said we are in the hands of the European Central Bank. Now, having said this, what is the strategy that would actually manage to reduce the debt to GDP ratio faster? Essentially, there is one strategy, which is growth, economic growth. People don't realize how powerful is adding 1 single percentage point of growth. So Italy has been growing, as I said, by 0.7 in the last 2 years. Instead of rising 0.7 for the next 10 years, it grew by 1.7 for the next, not 10, but 15 years. If a country like Italy, with this level of public debt and this level of deficit, increases its growth rate by 1 single point for 15 years, and at the end of those 15 years, the public debt to GDP ratio would have declined by almost 60 percentage points. Of course, this assumes that all the additional revenues coming from growth are saved. Politically, that will be very difficult, but it tells you how powerful a single percentage point of growth can be in terms of reducing the debt to GDP ratio. Has it been done by other countries? Portugal in the last 8 years reduced the debt to GDP ratio by 31 points in 8 years. That's the kind of stuff that we have to do. But that's why we need to reform bureaucracy to make Italy a place where it's easier to run business. And if we don't do this, then public debt will remain high and will remain in the hands of the ECB, which has promised to have to activate this tool as long as we respect the European fiscal rules and other rules, as I said earlier. But this has never been tested. And in a context in which maybe in 5 years, Alternative for Deutschland is going to lead Germany. Le Pen is going to lead France. I want to see how the technical action of the ECB will be managed in that context. And whether they will still be able to say something like what Draghi said in July 2012, whatever it takes.
On the breakthrough technology, actually, I do not agree very much with your point. I mean, I just want to give you an example. I mean, from our point of view, few years before COVID, EIB financed BioNTech, who is a German company, is very famous, for research on cancer. And they were developing this RMNA technology that suddenly it was through the COVID, it was discovered to be very effective for the vaccine, for the Pfizer vaccine. It's a 50 million investment. Airdom, I don't know if this is an Italian company based in Milan, and we are financing them, I think at the very beginning, something like 20 million, no more than that. They are now present in few continents for creating a system of storage of energy through the simple transformation of the CO2 from liquid to air and from air to liquid. So, there are, we know that for innovation you have to fail. And so we are ready to provide finance in Europe. I think that there are a lot of opportunity and the breakthrough technology you have to find it, you have to find it, and you have to fail. But, I mean, I gave you two examples in which, actually very tiny investment in the end, they gave the impulse to become something that can be scalable at, multinational. And I think that there could be many other examples like these on the hydrogen or whatever, but, actually, much more can be done, but overall, I think that it's also an issue of ecosystem. For instance, I'm for the 7th of October, I traveled also to Israel, where there is actually is an ecosystem very prone to innovation, and Europe also at the time to Horizon were also collaboration on those type of programs, and by nurturing that type of ecosystem, I think that we can develop very good initiatives.
Would you like to touch on the last question?
Yeah, I forgot to answer the question about the split within the government coalition. Certainly, from the point of view of the perception of what the government is doing, is not a good thing also internationally. Having said this, I think that Meloni is very strong, and nobody will be able, I don't think this government is going to collapse because of this split. I think that Meloni maintains a strong leadership of the government. There are inevitable statements made by Salvini, by the others, to show that they are present, but I think that she is fully in charge in terms of heading the government in one direction or the other. And so probably this government will last until the end of this current parliament.
Right, we touched upon a lot of themes tonight, so thank you very much for joining us, and please join me. Finish today. There's still a full week of events. Please check the rest of our events on social media, and I hope to see you there soon. Thanks so much for coming.
Oggi abbiamo inaugurato una pasta grattaciela.
La musica
che viene lì dove
Sky ai sindaci hanno chiesto